We all want to learn more effectively, right?
Right?
Like absorb knowledge like a sponge and retain it for years to come. But the reality is our brains are masters of efficiency. And sometimes that means letting go of information that seems less important. So today we're taking a deep dive into the psychology of learning. We're exploring what drives human retention. We've got some fascinating research to unpack, including academic excerpts about psychological factors influencing memory, and even an exploration of social learning.
Yeah, it's a common misconception that forgetting is a failure of our brains.
Mhm.
Instead of viewing forgetting as a negative, it's much more helpful to reframe it as an adaptive process.
Oh, interesting.
Our brains are bombarded with information constantly. If we held on to every single detail, our mental capacity would be overwhelmed in no time.
So forgetting is actually our brain's way of decluttering, helping us focus on what truly matters. I never thought of it that way.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The ability to forget allows our brains to prioritize and make room for new information and skills. You could almost think of it as a sophisticated filing system. You're right. Constantly organizing and prioritizing based on relevance and use.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about those times when we struggle to remember something we know we learned? Our sources dive into 5 key reasons why we forget. And some of these are incredibly relatable.
So let's start with encoding failures. Encoding is the initial step in memory formation, where we take in information and convert it into a form our brain can store. But sometimes we don't actually encode information effectively in the first place. Think of it as trying to save a file on your computer without clicking the save button. If you were distracted or the information wasn't presented in a way that grabbed your attention, it's likely the information never made it into your memory bank.
That explains those moments when I zone out during a lecture and realize later I have absolute no recollection of what was said. Like the information went in one ear and straight out the other.
Precisely. And then there's decay, the gradual weakening of memories over time. This is especially true for information we don't actively use or recall. Imagine a path in a forest. If you don't walk it regularly, it becomes overgrown and eventually disappears.
Oh.
It's the same with memories. The neural connections associated with that memory weaken if they aren't activated frequently.
That explains why I can barely remember my high school Spanish, even though I aced the classes. If you don't use it, you lose it. But what about those frustrating tip-of-the-tongue moments? It's like the information is right there, but I just can't access it.
That's a classic example of insufficient retrieval cues.
Okay.
Our memories are interconnected, forming a complex web of associations. Retrieval cues act like threads, helping us pull up specific memories from that web. Sometimes the right cue, whether it's a familiar smell, a specific location, or even a particular emotion, can unlock the memory we're searching for.
So it's like our brain is a giant library, and those retrieval cues act as the index cards leading us to the right book. And sometimes we just can't find the right index card.
Exactly. And sometimes our memories get tangled up, leading to interference. This happens when similar memories clash and block each other. A common example is trying to remember a new password when you've just used a very similar one for another account. The old memory interferes with your ability to retrieve the new one.
That's incredibly frustrating. It's like my brain is trying to cram too much information into the same mental drawer.
Precisely. And finally, we have intentional forgetting, a fascinating and complex phenomenon where we actively suppress certain memories, often as a way to protect ourselves from emotional pain or discomfort.
Like trying to bury that embarrassing memory from middle school deep down where it can never resurface.
Exactly. While intentional forgetting is still not fully understood, it suggests that our brains are constantly editing and revising our personal narratives.
Speaking of fascinating memory cases, our sources mention a man named Shereshevsky, a mnemonist with near-perfect memory. He could remember incredible amounts of detail, but it sounds like it came at a cost.
Shuresky's case is a powerful illustration of the incredible capacity of human memory and the potential downsides of remembering everything. Imagine a mind that is constantly flooded with a torrent of vivid memories. Every detail as sharp and clear as the moment it happened.
Sounds both amazing and overwhelming. What were the challenges Shereshevsky faced?
Well, he struggled to filter out irrelevant information, to generalize, to see the bigger picture. His world was a constant barrage of sensory details, making it difficult to make sense of his experiences or form meaningful connections.
So forgetting might actually be an essential part of learning and adapting to the world.
It seems counterintuitive, but yes. Forgetting allows us to focus, to generalize, and to create meaningful narratives from our experiences. It's a vital part of what makes us human.
This is giving me a whole new appreciation for the nuances of memory. But what about the things we do want to remember? What influences our ability to retain information effectively?
That's where the incredible power of emotions comes in.
Okay.
Our sources emphasize that emotions are not just subjective feelings.
Right.
They have a profound impact on how our brains process and store information.
You mean those heart-racing, tear-jerking, laugh-out-loud moments are more likely to stick with us?
Absolutely. Emotionally charged experiences tend to be remembered more vividly and accurately than neutral ones.
Wow.
This is because emotions trigger a cascade of physiological and neurological events that enhance memory consolidation.
So it's not just about the information itself, it's about the emotional context surrounding it.
Precisely. Think about it. The brain's primary job is to keep us safe and thriving.
Right.
Emotionally significant events, whether positive or negative, often carry important information for survival and well-being.
It's like our brains are saying, pay attention, this is important.
Exactly. And to understand this connection, we need to look at the key brain regions involved. The amygdala, for example, is like the brain's security guard. It's constantly scanning for threats and triggering a fear response when it detects danger.
So the amygdala is responsible for our fight-or-flight response.
Exactly. But it also plays a key role in memory. When we experience a strong emotion, the amygdala kicks into gear, signaling to other parts of the brain, hey, this is important, let's remember this.
Wow, so our emotional responses are directly linked to how our brains form and store memories. What are some of the other brain regions involved?
Well, the prefrontal cortex acts like the brain's executive, making decisions and regulating our behavior. But it also plays a crucial role in how we process and encode memories, helping us make sense of our emotional experiences and connect them to our conscious thoughts and actions.
So the prefrontal cortex helps us integrate those raw emotional responses from the amygdala into a more nuanced understanding of the event.
Precisely. And then we have the hippocampus, the brain's librarian.
Mm-hmm.
It receives information from the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, consolidating those emotionally charged experiences into lasting memories. The hippocampus is crucial for forming long-term memories and for spatial navigation, which is why we often associate memories with specific places.
So our memories aren't just stored as isolated facts. They're embedded in a rich tapestry of emotions, sensory experiences, and spatial contexts.
Exactly. It's this intricate web of associations that makes our memories so rich and complex. And when we understand how these different brain regions work together, we can start to unravel the fascinating interplay between emotion and memory.
This is incredible. So we've explored how forgetting can be an adaptive process and how emotions act as a turbocharger for memory. But what about the social dimension of learning?
Right.
Our sources mention Bandura's social learning theory, which suggests we learn not just from our own experiences, but from observing others.
Bandura's theory was a revolutionary shift in how we understand learning.
Oh, wow.
He proposed that we learn not just through direct experience, but also through observation, imitation, and modeling. Think about how children learn.
Okay.
They watch their parents, their siblings, their friends,
Right.
and they absorb behaviors, attitudes, and values from those around them.
So we're constantly learning by observing the actions and consequences of others, even when we're not consciously trying to.
Precisely. Bandura outlined 4 key steps for successful social learning: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation.
Okay.
First, you have to pay attention to the model, the person you're observing. If you're not paying attention, you're not going to learn anything.
That makes sense. You can't learn from someone if you're not even looking at them.
Right. Then comes retention.
Okay.
Can you remember what you observed? This involves encoding the information into your memory, making it stick so you can access it later.
It's not just about seeing something once. It's about internalizing it, making it your own.
Exactly. Then we have reproduction.
Okay.
Can you actually do what you observed? This is where practice and feedback come into play. It's one thing to watch someone play the piano. It's another thing to actually sit down and play it yourself.
So it's not just about knowing. It's about being able to apply that knowledge.
Precisely. And finally, motivation. Are you inspired to try? This is where the role of reinforcement and punishment comes in. We're more likely to imitate behaviors that are rewarded and less likely to repeat behaviors that are punished.
It's like the classic carrot and stick approach, but applied to learning.
Exactly. Bandura emphasized that both positive and negative consequences shape our learning. But he also recognized the importance of intrinsic motivation, that inner drive that pushes us to learn and grow for the sake of it, not just for external rewards.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where we're intrinsically motivated to learn, but we also see positive results from our efforts. I imagine social learning plays a huge role in how we develop social skills, attitudes, and even our sense of self.
Absolutely. Bandura's most famous experiment, the Bobo doll study, showed that even complex behaviors like aggression could be learned through observation. Children who watched adults acting aggressively toward a Bobo doll were more likely to imitate that behavior themselves, even without any direct reinforcement.
That's a bit concerning, especially when you think about the potential impact of media violence on children.
It's a valid concern. Bandura's theory highlights the powerful influence of social modeling on our behavior, both for good and for bad. We learn by watching others, whether it's our parents, our teachers, our friends, or the characters we see on TV and in movies.
This is fascinating, but I'm starting to feel a bit overwhelmed. It seems like learning is influenced by so many factors, our biology, our emotions, our social environment. It's a lot to wrap my head around.
It's true, learning is a complex and multifaceted process, but that's what makes it so fascinating to study. And as we delve deeper into the psychology of learning, we can uncover valuable insights that can help us become more effective learners and unlock our full potential.
That's encouraging. So where do we go from here? We've covered the basic mechanisms of forgetting, the power of emotions and memory, and the fascinating world of social learning.
In part two of this deep dive, we'll build on these foundational concepts and explore practical strategies for boosting memory, leveraging the power of emotion, and choosing positive role models to enhance our learning journeys.
I'm already looking forward to it. This has been a truly enlightening conversation. I feel like I'm starting to see the bigger picture of how learning really works.
It's been my pleasure to dive into these fascinating topics with you. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those hearts open to the endless possibilities of learning. Welcome back. I'm eager to continue our exploration into the psychology of learning and delve into some practical strategies for improving retention. I hope you've had a chance to ponder how forgetting can be an advantage and how those powerful emotions actually help us remember things that matter.
It's certainly given me a lot to think about. And I'm excited to shift gears a bit and focus on what we can do to optimize our learning. What are some practical techniques for making information stick?
Well, let's start with spaced repetition, a powerful technique that leverages the way our brains naturally forget and relearn information. Instead of cramming all your studying into one session, try spreading it out over time. This gives your brain multiple opportunities to encode the information, making those memories more durable.
So it's about working with our brain's natural forgetting curve instead of fighting against it.
Exactly. Think of it like building a muscle. You wouldn't expect to get ripped by lifting weights just once. You need consistent practice over time to see results.
Okay.
The same applies to learning.
That's a helpful analogy. So instead of pulling an all-nighter before a test, it's better to study a little bit each day leading up to it.
Precisely. By spacing out your study sessions, you're giving your brain a chance to consolidate the information, making those memories more resistant to forgetting. And speaking of mixing things up, another effective strategy is interleaving, which involves alternating between different subjects or skills during your study session.
I've heard of that technique. It seems counterintuitive at first, but I'm curious to learn more about how it works.
Interleaving forces your brain to work harder, to actively recall information instead of passively reviewing it. Think of it like cross-training for your brain. Instead of just jogging on the treadmill, you're adding in some weightlifting, some swimming, maybe even some yoga. You're challenging your brain in different ways, making those neural connections more robust.
So instead of just focusing on one chapter of a textbook at a time, I could maybe mix in some practice problems from a different subject or even work on a creative project for a bit.
That's a great approach. By switching between different types of tasks, you're keeping your brain engaged and preventing it from zoning out.
It's like adding some variety to our mental diet. And speaking of actively engaging with the material, we have active recall, which is basically forcing our brains to retrieve information from memory.
Active recall is one of the most effective learning strategies out there. It's like putting your brain through a mental workout. By actively trying to recall information without looking at the answers, you're strengthening those neural pathways and making the information more accessible.
So instead of just rereading iNotes or highlighting passages in a textbook, I should be actively quizzing myself or trying to explain the concepts to someone else.
Exactly. Think flashcards, self-testing, summarizing information without looking at your notes. Anything that forces you to retrieve the information from memory will boost your retention.
I like that it's called active recall. It emphasizes the importance of actually doing something with the information instead of just passively absorbing it.
Precisely. And now let's delve into the fascinating interplay between emotion and memory. We talked in part one about how emotionally charged experiences tend to be remembered more vividly than neutral ones.
It's like our brains are saying, this matters. Pay attention. But how can we actually harness the power of emotions to improve our learning?
Well, it's about finding ways to make the material personally meaningful, to create an emotional connection that resonates with you. Instead of just trying to memorize facts and figures, try to relate the information to something you care about, something that evokes an emotional response.
So if I'm trying to learn about history, I should try to connect those historical events to my own values, beliefs, or experiences.
Exactly. Find a way to make it relevant to your own life, to your own story. If you can connect the information to something you already care about, it's much more likely to stick.
It's like turning a dry textbook chapter into a captivating story.
Precisely. Our brains are wired for stories. They help us make sense of the world, connect with others, and remember information. By weaving information into a narrative, you're creating a richer, more engaging learning experience.
So instead of just memorizing dates and names, I should try to imagine myself back in that historical period, experiencing those events firsthand.
That's a fantastic approach. By using your imagination, you're tapping into the power of visualization and creating a multisensory experience that activates more areas of your brain, leading to stronger memory formation. And speaking of senses, don't underestimate the power of scent, music, or even taste to enhance learning.
I've heard of using scent to trigger memories. Is there any science behind that?
Absolutely. Our senses are powerful memory cues. Certain smells, sounds, or even tastes can transport us back to a specific time and place, evoking vivid memories and emotions.
So if I'm studying for a particular subject, I could maybe use a specific scent or listen to a specific playlist while I'm learning the material. And then when I'm taking the test, I could recreate that sensory experience to help me recall the information.
That's a brilliant strategy. It's like creating a mnemonic device, a sensory anchor that helps you access the information more readily.
I love the idea of hacking my brain with scents and sounds. What about our physical environment? Can that also influence learning?
Our environment plays a surprisingly significant role in how we learn and remember. You've probably noticed that you study better in some locations than others.
Definitely. I can't focus at all if there's too much noise or distraction.
That's because our brains are constantly taking in information from our surroundings. If your study environment is always the same, your brain may start to associate that environment with only one type of learning. Varying your study environment forces your brain to work harder to encode and retrieve information, making those memories more robust and accessible.
So instead of just holing up in my room all the time, I should try studying at the library, at a coffee shop, or even outside in the park.
Exactly. By changing your physical surroundings, you're creating distinct context cues that can help you retrieve the information later on. It's like creating multiple pathways to the same destination. The more routes you have, the easier it is to find your way.
This is all so fascinating. We've covered space repetition, interleaving active recall, harnessing emotions, and even the impact of our senses in physical environment. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
And now let's shift gears and explore the power of social learning building on Bandura's theory that we learn not just from our own experiences, but from observing others.
This is where things get really interesting. We've all experienced how observing others can influence our behaviors and attitudes, but what are some practical ways to leverage this for better learning?
It starts with being mindful of the models we choose for ourselves and for those we influence. Surrounding ourselves with positive role models, people who embody the qualities and skills we admire, can have a profound impact on our learning and growth.
So it's not just about the information itself, it's about who we learn from. I imagine a good teacher or mentor can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. We learn by watching others, observing their actions, their attitudes, their values. A skilled teacher or mentor can inspire us, guide us, and provide valuable feedback that accelerates our learning, and it's not limited to formal education.
So even watching a documentary about a successful entrepreneur or reading a biography of an inspiring historical figure could be a form of social learning.
Precisely. We can learn from people we've never met, from historical figures, from fictional characters, even from people who hold different beliefs than our own. It's about expanding our horizons and recognizing that everyone has something to teach us.
That's a powerful perspective shift.
Hmm.
It's not about agreeing with everything someone says or does. It's about being open to learning from their experiences and perspectives.
Exactly. And as we become more aware of the power of social learning, we can be more intentional about the models we choose for ourselves and for those we influence.
It's like building a personal board of advisors, even if those advisors are just characters in a book or people we admire from afar.
I love that analogy. And it highlights the power we have to curate our own learning environments.
This has been an incredible conversation, and I feel like I'm walking away with a toolkit of practical strategies to improve my learning. But I'm curious, what's the next level of this deep dive? Where do we go from here?
In our final part, we'll explore the broader implications of what we've learned and discuss how we can become more conscious architects of our learning journeys.
I can't wait to continue the exploration. Until then, keep those minds engaged and those hearts open to the endless possibilities of learning. Welcome back to the deep dive. In the previous parts, we explored the surprising benefits of forgetting, the power of emotions in shaping memories, and the fascinating ways we learn by observing others. Now in this final part, we're going to shift our focus to becoming more intentional about our learning. It's almost like leveling up from passive learners to becoming architects of our own learning journeys.
That's a fantastic way to frame it. We're bombarded with information constantly, and it's easy to get swept away in the current passively consuming whatever comes our way. But as we've seen, learning is a much more dynamic process. We have more agency than we realize.
Right, it's not just about absorbing information, it's about actively shaping our understanding of the world.
Yeah.
But how do we actually become these architects of our learning? Where do we even begin?
Well, it starts with awareness. Being mindful of the models we choose to learn from the information we prioritize and the environments we create for learning. Think back to that question we posed earlier. If learning is so heavily influenced by observation, how can we be more intentional about who and what we're learning from?
That question has really stuck with me. It's making me think about all the subtle ways we're influenced by our surroundings, the people we interact with, the media we consume, even the physical spaces we inhabit.
Exactly. We're not just talking about formal education here. This applies to all the ways we learn and grow throughout our lives and our relationships, our hobbies, our careers, even our social media feeds. Every interaction, every experience, every piece of information we encounter has the potential to shape us.
It's almost overwhelming when you think about it that way. But you're right, we do have a choice in how we engage with the world around us.
And that choice is incredibly empowering. Instead of being passive consumers of information, we can become curators, actively selecting what we allow into our mental space.
I love that analogy of becoming curators of our own learning. It's like we're designing a personal museum filled with exhibits that inspire and challenge us. But with so much information out there, how do we decide what to include in our mental museums?
Hmm. It's like being a chef creating a delicious and nourishing meal. You wouldn't just throw in any random ingredients you find. You'd select high-quality ingredients that complement each other and contribute to the overall flavor profile.
So we need to be more discerning about the information we consume, being mindful of its source, its quality, and how it aligns with our goals and values.
Exactly. We can curate our learning environments by seeking out positive role models, choosing information sources that align with our values, and creating physical spaces that support focus and creativity.
This makes me think about how I engage with social media. It can be such a time sink, and I often find myself mindlessly scrolling without any real purpose.
Social media can be a powerful tool for connection and learning, but it's so easy to get caught up in the endless stream of content.
Right? It's like being at an all-you-can-eat buffet. You want to try everything, but you end up feeling overstuffed and unsatisfied.
It's about shifting from being a passive consumer to becoming an active curator. Instead of mindlessly scrolling, be more intentional about who you follow, what content you engage with, and how much time you spend in those digital spaces.
So it's about unfollowing accounts that drain my energy or add negativity to my feed, and being more proactive about seeking out content that inspires me or teaches me something new.
Precisely. It's about being mindful of the digital influences that shape your thoughts and behaviors. And this principle extends beyond social media.
Right. It's about applying that same level of intentionality to all areas of our lives. Being more selective about the books we read, the podcasts we listen to, the conversations we engage in, even the environments we choose to spend our time in.
Absolutely. It's about surrounding yourself with people who challenge and inspire you, who share your passion for learning and growth. It's about seeking out experiences that broaden your horizons and push you outside your comfort zone.
And it's not just about learning new things. It's about unlearning old patterns and beliefs that no longer serve us.
That's such an important point. Learning isn't just about accumulating new information. It's about constantly evolving, challenging our assumptions, and refining our understanding of the world.
It's about recognizing that learning is a lifelong journey, not a destination. There's always more to discover, more to explore, more to understand.
I couldn't agree more. And the more we embrace that journey, the more fulfilling and enriching our lives become.
This has been such an incredible conversation. I feel like we've covered so much ground, exploring the intricacies of memory emotion, social learning, and the power of intentional learning. I'm walking away with a newfound appreciation for the complexity of learning and a sense of excitement about the possibilities that lie ahead.
It's been a true pleasure diving into these fascinating topics with you, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to become more conscious architects of their own learning journeys.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the psychology of learning. Until next time, keep those minds curious, those hearts open, and those learning adventures alive.